Good morning. It's a very, very, very early morning for some of you if you're joining us now, but if you're in Europe, it's what, in middle of the night. I don't know. It's some time of the day. We're putting this up very, very early because we should let you know that at 10 a.m. Pacific time, you should join us right here on Fandom Entertainment, where we will be live watching the Snyder Cut. We will be live watching it. And by we, I mean all of your favorite people. Danielle will be there, Lon will be there, Spencer will be there, Joe Starr will be there, and Eric and I will be popping on and off because we've already seen it and talked to you about it, but we do want to see what they think of it as they live watch along. But right now, we are here to talk about a whole different comic book thing that has launched today, which is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and on Disney Plus. So we are going to be talking about this. This is full spoilers. If you haven't seen it yet, it's available to you now. Go have a watch, come back here and talk to us about it, because again, full spoilers. This is your
Episode 1.
long warning for episode 1. Spoilers, 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 spoilers. So, Eric, as compared to the debut series from Marvel, this iteration of Marvel Television, which is under Marvel Studios, unlike the previous iteration of Marvel Television, we should note, which was done by a completely different team.
Yep.
This, as opposed to WandaVision, starts off very, very, very Marvel-like. I mean, it feels like it's situated like right in the center of the MCU, particularly at the open. But as the episode went on, it's where I really saw, wow, they're fully taking advantage of the opportunity to delve into the aspects of these characters that we just never have the time to get to in movies. And I have to confess, there's some really fun action in this. There's really great action sequences that I think people will like, but that to me is the meat of it and the heart of it and why I care about the show at the end of the episode. You?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, we talked about how this wasn't the way it's supposed to be. This was supposed to be the first show, which makes sense, right? They basically would have been like, hey, you can get the same bang for your buck at home as in the movies. Big action, big fun. And then because of COVID, they had to switch up the schedule and we got WandaVision first. We got the weird one first, which isn't
I
what was
like
supposed to.
that.
But me too, because I think you and I, we both clicked in with the weird one so much. But now you kind of have to take a step back to like, hey guys, this is not going to be WandaVision. And so that opening, I'm like, this is really fun, but it wasn't totally grabbing me. But like you said, a little bit in, I go, oh, okay. Really, once they were like, let's really dig into Bucky, because again, these are how these movies work. They have these big things happening and these characters have these huge moments, and Bucky can say, I did terrible things and I feel terrible about it. But then the movie has to move on. It's like, we got to deal with 10 million other things. Here, it's like, oh, wait, he killed a lot of people for a lot of years. That must be weighing on this guy if he's a good person, which he is. And that really got me into it because like Wanda and Vision, it's getting to take Bucky and Sam and be like, okay, you've seen these guys, you like these guys, but we've never really dug in deep with them. And there's stuff here we can dig in with. And so I thought it was very impressive. Sam, there was some good stuff too. And, we never knew anything about his family, anything about his life when he wasn't fighting alongside Captain America. So suddenly we're getting to see that. I think that's going to get even deeper as we go on, especially based on some things the creators have said. But right from the beginning with Bucky, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, this is pretty heavy in a way that I appreciated.
I agree with you. And I want to say it's interesting because I was watching it with my partner, who is very much a Marvel guy. He sort of grew up loving the comics, perhaps not to the degree that you are, Eric, but that is a rare degree, to be sure. So
unhealthy degree.
no, I don't think it's unhealthy. I just think that it's magnificently elevated. So he's very much a Marvel guy, and he's very much kind of like an action movie guy. And so he was all in after the first sequence because he just said, that's great. That's really great action. I said, it is. It's really fun. I like it. But I wasn't all in, and to your point, until we really started to delve in with Bucky. Because I was like, oh, this is magnificent in the sense that you think that he's just going to get this free pass in the sense that, well, he wasn't operating of his own volition. And, but think of the trauma. I mean, not to go back to that too much, but of being literally unconscious for all of those years and yet present and only coming out to commit murder and then go back to sleep. And now he has to live with the memories of all of the people that he's killed. And they made it particularly intimate because he's formed this relationship, this friendship to try and be the support of this man who he took away his son, and
Yeah.
he's kind of self-punishing, and he's also trying to find redemption by helping this man who's now so alone. It's a really beautiful, and then also their relationship is just naturally really sweet and funny. I just thought out of the gate, wow, I immediately care about Bucky so much more than I already liked him,
Yeah.
but I immediately am so much more interested. I care about this relationship. When he went to his door, I panicked. That tells you how I think the show did a great job, because I started actually sweating and going, please don't tell him, please don't tell him, please don't tell him, you're going to ruin his life and yours. That moment of relief, of confession, isn't worth it. Other people might have a different take on that, by the way.
Right.
But the fact that I had that elevated of a response, I think speaks to the storytelling here.
Yeah, it was very effective how they personalized it. Has you realize who, because this man is very elderly, because you realize he killed his son decades before.
Decades ago.
And
Yeah.
so that adds almost to how poignant it is. It's like this man who's had to live with his son being taken from him a long time ago, and Bucky having lived with the guilt that this man has never gotten over it. And I did that even though I wasn't of my own mind at the time. And like you said, it's an interesting mix because they do have a sweet dynamic, and he's trying to help him hit on the girl and all that stuff. But it's like at the same time, there's this weight of it. And yeah, it's just, it is very impressive. And it is funny, right? Because it is two shows in a row where you can't help but be like, oh, they can really deal with the trauma, which is, it's like, you don't want it to be a cliche, but at the same time, it's like, no, this makes sense because again, these characters who were side characters, WandaVision, Bucky, Sam, they were not the center. They weren't Cap and Iron Man and the characters we super focus on. So big things happened to them, but we couldn't really spend time with them. Like we spent a lot more time with like how Tony was affected by things that happened. These other guys, it had to just kind of be dealt with very quickly. So it makes so much sense to be like, no, this is something that they're living with. And I really admire that these shows are able to be like, okay, if we're going to have several hours with these guys, we better make it mean something. And I think so far that they're doing a very impressive job of that.
Mean something on a character level, means something on an emotional resonant level.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, is like, to your point, you don't want to become a cliche about it, but I think probably a lot of criticisms that other filmmakers think they have, even whether they actually watch these movies or not, and I'm not calling anyone out specifically, about genre films in general, is that they think that they don't take the important moments in life seriously, that they don't actually deal with them, and to some degree that's true. Like, action movies aren't built that way. They're meant to be a fantasy, and so if there's a 17 car pileup, you're not thinking about the carnage. You shouldn't be thinking about the carnage, but this is grounding this world while still allowing it to be heightened and a wish fulfillment and all of those things, which is a pretty impressive balance that they're striking. And yeah, you can't have, because I think this is going to be a show too about who do we need as Captain America, who has the right to be Captain America, who would allow themselves into that position. And so, I mean, it opens up where we hear Steve saying to Sam, it's for you, and he says it feels like it's for somebody else, and he says, well, it's not, right? And then we end the episode with like the branded government okayed version of it, which is just this imitation of Steve instead of a new hero, right, for a new era. And I think the show is about like, maybe there's not one Captain America,
right,
because there's not one American, you know what I mean? Version of an American.
Absolutely. And I interviewed the director and the showrunner this week, and Malcolm Spellman, the showrunner, said a lot about, they really want to dig in on that. And they certainly want to talk about what it means for Sam as like a black man in modern America to kind of be bequeathed the shield and what he thinks about that. But because as you see at the end of this premiere, like at first Sam doesn't feel it is for him, and he gives it up. Although of course we're going to see what happens after that. But then the government's pick to be like, here's our new guy, is just a guy who's trying to be like Steve Rogers. And so, and we don't know, and we know he's John Walker from the comics. We don't know exactly what this version of him will be like yet. But we see this whole thing of like, okay, the government's kind of handpicking what they think is right, but is that right when they're just trying to mimic what someone very successfully did in the past with Steve Rogers wearing that costume?
And is it right when it doesn't acknowledge what the world of today, and it doesn't acknowledge candidly what Steve wanted?
Right. Exactly.
Which is even worse. So I'm excited to have that exploration. And I think, with the Winter Soldier, everybody has known for years, like there are versions where the Winter Soldier becomes Captain America, but to the point of the show, that is not a thing that should or could happen overnight. He has a lot to deal with before he's going to take on that emblem. So, and it also has different meanings because to what I was trying to say is like the Steve Rogers version is like the kind of, not in a bad way, because I actually love Cap as a character, as you know, like it's probably my favorite character, but is like the like poster board version, right? But it doesn't capture the reality of the United States. It doesn't capture what we really truly are. So for Sam to be the person, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like he's the one that he bestowed it to. He deserves it. He's got the integrity, and he also is of this era. But Bucky, on the other hand, is another part of us, which is a broken part of us, a part of us that is flawed and has made terrible mistakes and done terrible things. And can that part heal? And can that part live into the ideals of itself? Like it's those two stories happening at once that I think is pretty fascinating. That got really esoteric. So
no, but you're actually you're kind of talking in the way Malcolm Spellman talked to me, because he said, look, we don't have a friend who killed Tony Stark's family and a bunch of people, but we do have friends who might have something that is just weighing on them, that is like a thing that they are always kind of tripped up on in their own head, and that is what he wanted to connect to here with that, in the big picture sense. And it's funny, as we're talking about this, it's like I love the Marvel movies, and I was thinking about, like, to me it was almost like Die Hard, which everyone is like rightfully so one of the best action movies, if not one of the best movies ever made. It's almost as if like we're getting like a Holly Gennaro show where Hollywood's like, if you actually dealt with the fact that, man, my boss, my mentor was just murdered and I was captured. And like, we actually, because Die Hard ends with a fun song and it's like, everything's okay. But it's like these shows are getting to do those in between moments in a really cool way where they're like, okay, let's really kind of dig in here with the person who's not the lead in those films and see what their story is in a way we never have explored before.
Absolutely. I mean, and let's talk about Sam's backstory too, because to your point, I was actually a little nervous, like, wow, they're really going to give all of the meat of this in terms of character. Initially, I worried to Bucky, because he's the one dealing with really deep stuff, and then Sam was going to go do action. But no, he actually has quite a bit to deal with as well, in terms of we need to understand what it meant for him to be gone for those 5 years, which is another thing that we get to deal with here, like both for his family and the people that were left behind, but also for himself coming back. Like, oh, you have no financial record for 5 years. Yeah, I disappeared and stuff. Right. So that's what that, and also, and I brought this up to you immediately, this is the first time that I recall in the movies that they've actually mentioned, do we get paid or not? And if so, how so? And I just want to state something for the record, ladies and gentlemen. If what he's saying is true and Tony wasn't paying for them, union. That is so messed up. That's like, they're like his kept superheroes. Like, yeah, I'll let you live in the mansion and I'll buy you dinner, but you don't get insurance? What kind of crap is that? Union! Oh my goodness.
I do assume Tony would have paid any medical bills. But that was funny to learn they don't have a salary. I really like that this show, just from the premiere and also just talking to them again, it's like, it really looks like this will be the first time we really dig in to what this world is like 5 years after the blip, because Spider-Man treated it comedically. And I really like that movie, but it's like, that's what they chose to do. It's like, have fun with it in the opening and then kind of move on. And WandaVision, it just wasn't the focus. When we saw what was happening with Monica, it was very intense. And that was a great moment in WandaVision where we could realize, oh my gosh, that's her returning. But of course, the focus of WandaVision was this surreal, invented world. This show looks like it'll be the first time we're really going to dig into, man, things are really screwed up right now, both just in the sense of people having to deal with people returning, but even financially. Yeah, it's like everything's pretty messed up financially since I was gone for 5 years and assumed dead and never coming back. That's kind of cool to get to finally dig into that a little.
And even on kind of like the larger scale arc of the story is like, there's this group that wishes they didn't come back because they were likely living in a world, I think the point was, where like borders meant less. And probably in some, because the structures would have collapsed with half of the people.
Kind of that nod you get in Endgame with him talking about like, hey, there's a lot less boats in the water. And it just feels like in one sense, things had chilled out a lot because half the world was gone.
Yeah. And I think that probably it created opportunity, right? Like it probably, chaos is a ladder in that case. So like, yeah, I guess like to some degree, you would imagine that it had had created a slightly more egalitarian world because everyone was in it together and everyone was having the same crisis point, right? And
Yeah.
we haven't dealt with that as well. And there would be people who would think, well, that egalitarian world was working better for me, and probably for most people.
Right.
I'm not saying that's the case, but like you would understand that perception. And so that's actually a pretty meaty and interesting villains to go up against as well for them. And it opens up a lot of other questions.
Yeah, because it's funny, we didn't get a lot of things we know were coming. Like we didn't get Sharon Carter, we didn't get Zemo. And Zemo's whole thing, obviously he had this very personal vendetta against the Avengers. And we've seen him in the trailer talk about like kind of the threat of superheroes. And so it is curious to see, because we obviously a few superheroes were still around in those 5 years, but even that would have been a much less subdued thing. So I really liked Zemo anyway in Civil War. So I'm curious how he'll fit into this, as far as being this instrument of someone who's like, I don't like this structure of these sort of men who operate as gods above us, and wants to kind of tear it down. That has come back in a bigger way, because as we saw at the end of Endgame, a bunch of them just came back,
Yeah. And you know what, candidly, I would understand that perception. And that's what's interesting to me. Like, so to break this down, like to get a little more even more meta about it is they couldn't have known this and didn't know what would have happened with COVID when they were making the show. However, the fact that it's getting released a year into what is a global crisis, that's one thing like that we have all had to experience in different ways together, but also a year where it's like people are experiencing the effects of that crisis and needing to work through it. And probably a lot of people are trying to figure out like, what is this? How do I even deal with this level of like daily trauma in that sense? And then the other interesting thing is like it's doing that, and it's taking this examination of like, okay, well, what do we say, what does it mean when we represent America with the Captain America figurehead, and what are the different, like, that can mean many different things and should mean many different things, like that we should mean a lot of different people, but to have that also in the midst of like, well, what does that mean as it in relationship to the rest of the world and borders, and resourcing, now that it was perhaps flattened out and it's not again. That's a lot for like a superhero show which also has really good action.
Yeah, no, I mean they're using the flag smasher concept from the comics, which was in the comics was a single guy but leading a group. Here it's an organization, the Flag Smashers, but they're basically like trying to tear down like the divisions. Like from their point of view, they're like, hey, having all these countries, it just leads to hostility. So if we get rid of that, that'll help the world. So it is definitely, and on one hand, of course, they're functionally going to be like bad guys that are doing bad things, but it's a compelling sort of concept to put into the middle of a show about the legacy of a character named Captain America, is having villains who want to sort of take down the idea of America and all countries. It's not like they like hate America, they hate all the countries equally.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where it's like it's a more interesting villain because there's a part of me, that's like, I get that. I don't probably get that it can happen in the way that you think it can, which is like you can just snap that off and everything's fine and better for everybody. We wish that was snap. But you can understand like it's so boring and it rarely happens, which is good, but it is so fundamentally boring when there's a villain that's like evil stuff. Great.
Just absolutely.
Like, why do I care? Move along.
The other little thing I want to throw out before we end about villains is I really enjoyed that they did have Batroc from who was in Winter Soldier as a villain in the opening, only because as many as these movies as there are, one thing they've never captured from the comics is like the B-level villains who just come in and like fight the hero and then go away. It always has to be because it has to be like, oh my gosh, a really huge threat is here for this movie. And so I'd love if these shows can do that more and be like, hey, sometimes they just have like the recurring enemies. And they were able to use Batroc in that way. That made me happy because there's not a lot of characters they can do that with, since either they usually tend to die or kind of really go away elsewhere at the end of these things.
Yeah. Well, for me, Eric, I loved it. I really, I think like you, in the first 5 to 10 minutes, I was like, oh wow, I was really into
this
the
was
weird.
fun,
Fun,
yeah.
I was super into the weird stuff we were doing over there.
Right.
And then by the end of it, I was like, nope, this is really great. Lots going on, lots of meaty stuff with these characters, and what a cool opportunity, not just for Marvel, and the creators behind these shows, but for these actors. to actually really get the space to dig into these aspects of the characters. And by the time we get to them again in the movies, where we will not have as much time, we will care about them and have so much more context.
Yeah, this can help fuel all that. And it is funny that they never were together in the first episode, the Falcon Winter Soldier, but I'm guessing that's going to happen fairly soon. And I think it was the right call to really be like, let's spend time with them separately, because we know it's going to be kind of a buddy cop scenario. They've said it's going to be kind of evoke like a Lethal Weapon thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I think this was the wise thing to first let's firmly establish who they are, and then we'll get to them bouncing off each other.
Yeah, one final question that I had that lingers just from this episode in terms of relationship was like, did Bucky seek that man out, or did they happen to meet?
I'm 95% sure he sought him out. Like, I just, I thought, it's like, it's our anchor for the episode. So we see he's specifically having a nightmare about that at the beginning. I think, this is kind of a form of penance he's done to find, because when you first see how old the guy is, I'm like, is this someone from World War II? And then I'm like, oh no, this is someone, he killed that guy's son in the opening decades
maybe
before.
In the 80s.
Yeah, they made sure to show it was like pre-key card in the hotel. So I think maybe he's done this to other people, but certainly with this guy, maybe it's the first guy he's done this with. He's sought him out for sort of a person, because the guy he killed there had nothing to, that's the whole thing. He was just a witness. He was the wrong place, wrong time. So it's like one of the people he'd feel most guilty about, because it had no, like, he wasn't a military guy. He wasn't like doing anything that Hydra would target. He just was in the wrong place,
Yeah. And oh my goodness. And now he's going to have to go up against a separate terrorist organization. All right. Lots to come. We will be reviewing this on a weekly basis. This one was pre-taped, but normally we will be reaching out to you for your comments and thoughts via the voice of God, Ryan. And we will see you next Friday, or at 10 a.m. this morning, this Friday, today, if you're watching it today on the 18th, the 19th, for 4 sweet hours of Justice League.
Sure,
so we will see Snyder, all the Snyder that you can get and more. Yeah, that's it. See you later. It's gonna be fun.